2016 was very chaotic. You had the geopolitical tension between Russia and Ukraine, and at the same time, both entries sent entries that genuinely could win the whole thing. Then there was the dark horse, Australia, with Damim delivering a vocal performance people still talk about today. Going into the final, Russia was leading with the odds, with Australia and Ukraine right behind. The voting sequence itself was very tense. Australia completely dominated the jury vote. Then the televote came in, and suddenly Russia started catching up fast. And then you get that split screen at the end with Russia and Ukraine left standing there, which made the atmosphere even more uncomfortable, considering the political situation at that time. The points were basically getting cannibalized between these same three countries all night, which is why the gaps between all three ended up being so small. The new voting system could not have asked for a more dramatic debut. If 2016 happened under the old format, it still would have been tense, but nowhere near the level of stress and chaos we actually got from the year's final scoreboard reveal. – 2021 was a post-pandemic explosion. Everyone was finally back, and the energy that had been kept inside for 2 years finally exploded here. You had gritty, sweaty glam rock from Måneskin crashing straight into Barbara Pravi's emotional chanson ballad, with Switzerland sitting there as a technical jury favorite. This year was pretty much the direct result of that post-pandemic energy burst. Jury were heavily backing Switzerland and France for the clean vocals and polished performances. But the televote had been starved of live energy for 2 years and went completely fair off for Måneskin. Then they came in and destroyed the televote with 318 points. What made the ending so tense is that nobody fully dominated both sides. France pulled massive audience support too, and Switzerland dominated parts of the jury vote, and the public heavily supported Italy. That's why the final gap was only 25 points. It is exactly the kind of finish fans needed after 2 years of nothing. 2019 was way more subdued compared to the years that came after. Moody, emotional, radio-ready pop going up against urban Italian swagger. It was modern in a very late 2010s way, like the contest was slowly shifting into something more streaming era friendly. What makes the result interesting is that Duncan Lawrence was the ultimate consensus winner. He didn't actually win the jury vote, and he didn't win the televote either, which sounds weird for a Eurovision winner until you look closer at the scoreboard. He was just consistently near the top everywhere, no collapse with the juries, no collapse with the public, just steady points constantly staking up all night. Meanwhile, Mahmoud was also a fan favorite for a lot of people and had more momentum with the audience, but he was also slightly more polarizing depending on the country. That difference is what decided the contest. Duncan won because almost everybody liked him enough, while Italy had slightly less universal support to win. That's why the gap ended up being small. 2019 was won by consistency from the top two. In 2024, we got a repeat of 2023, with Croatia's Baby Lasagna as the public favorite and Switzerland's Nemo as the jury favorite. Nemo brought a performance that looked impossible to pull off live, constantly moving around the stage while still delivering flawless vocals, switching between rap, pop, and even opera without ever seeming out of control. Meanwhile, Croatia came in with its infectious blend of rock, punk, and electronic influences that the audience immediately connected with. What makes these results stand out is how closely it mirrored 2023, except Nemo had noticeably less public support than Loreen did a year earlier. But Nemo still managed to build a fortress with the juries, pulling in 365 points because the performance was technically superior on every level. Vocals, staging, difficulty, everything. By the time the jury vote was finished, Switzerland had already created a massive safety net for itself. Then the televote was revealed, and Croatia surged to the top. Unfortunately for the public, This year felt like a repeat of 2023. The energetic, memorable, fun entry that people instantly got attached to just didn't receive enough jury points to overcome the deficit. Baby Lasagna dominated the public vote, but the gap left by the juries was simply too large to close. In the end, Switzerland's jury buffer was enough to survive. The juries rewarded technical artistry, and the public went for the more fun energy. And the gap between those two sides nearly collapsed completely by the final scoreboard reveal. It's fair to wonder whether Baby Lasagna might have had a better shot under the updated jury guidelines. But under the system used in 2024, Nemo had already done enough on the jury night to hold on. "2023 was the ultimate fandom civil war. Lauren, Eurovision royalty that pretty much every Eurovision fan knows, brought flawless, ethereal Eurovision pop perfection to go head-to-head with Karia's tipsy neon green party metal. From the moment both songs emerged as frontrunners, the fan base was split right down the middle. What made this result so controversial is that it produced one of the biggest jury and televote splits in Eurovision history. Lauren completely locked down the jury vote, helped by the fact that there weren't many traditional jury-bait songs in the lineup. The juries rewarded the polished vocals, the staging, and the overall professionalism of the package, building such a huge lead that Sweden had a massive safety net before the televote was even revealed. Then the televote arrived and Finland absolutely exploded. Karia pulled an enormous 376 points from the public, one of the biggest televote scores ever at the time. And suddenly, it felt like the entire arena was behind him. The crowd was chanting "Cha Cha Cha" throughout the voting sequence, creating the feeling that Finland had all the momentum. The rivalry had become so intense by this voting that Finnish viewers didn't give Sweden a single televote point, whether it was a strategy voting, national pride, or simply people putting all their support behind Karia. It showed just how divided the audience had become between the two favorites. The ending felt far more one-sided in the arena than it actually was on paper. Watching it live, it looked like the public had completely rejected the jury result. In reality, Karia almost managed to close the gap entirely. Lauren's jury was just large enough to survive the televote onslaught, giving Sweden the win in one of the most debated results of the modern Eurovision era. If you're into Eurovision stats, rankings, and deep dives, hit like and subscribe. We're just getting started. "2025 was a tense season. More than anything else, the season became defined by the possibility of an Israel victory and the reaction that possibility generated across the fan base. While much of the discussion was focused there, Austria arrived with something ambitious and dramatic. The performance was a piece of musical theater, combining operatic elements with black and white staging that stood out. Austria managed to convince both sides of the voting for different reasons. The juries were particularly drawn to the creativity of the staging and the way the entire package came together. The vocals were solid, the song was well executed, and the performance was well thought out. The public didn't embrace it quite as strongly, but there was still a lot of respect for what Australia had just attempted. The staging was bold, the concept was memorable, and even people who didn't have it as their winner could appreciate the ambition behind it. Austria relied heavily on the jury vote, but still managed to gain enough televote support to get across the finish line. It wasn't a total sweep, and there were definitely stronger televote magnets in the contest, but Austria had already created enough breathing room with the juries to stay in control. That's what ultimately decided 2025. Israel had the momentum, the attention, and the storyline that dominated discussion throughout the season. Austria had the juries. In the end, the jury advantage proved just large enough to withstand everything that came afterwards. "2018 was a pop diva showdown. Nada's quirky anthem loaded with loop pedals and bizarre chicken noises, going up against Elodie Fourier's fiery, steady, ready choreography and her professional-level performance. There was two completely different ways to create a showdown for the same trophy. The battle between the two started long before Eurovision week even began. Neta's song had already gone viral months before the contest, becoming one of the most talked about entries of the season. By the time delegations arrived at Eurovision, Israel was already sitting at or near the top of most predictions and fan rankings. Cyprus was the opposite story. Eleni started as an outsider compared to the pre-contest favorites, but every rehearsal seemed to build more hype. As Eurovision week went on, she became the late-game fan favorite, and by the final days, many people genuinely believed she was about to pull off the win. The juries respected both entries, but the televote showed where the momentum was. While Cyprus upped the competitive atmosphere throughout the night, the public overwhelmingly went for the unforgettable and eccentric package that Israel brought. Neta's performance was weird, memorable, and exactly the kind of thing that stands out at the time. Neither of the two favorites actually won the jury vote. Austria took that honor, while Cyprus and Israel finished close behind. Neta finished near the top with the juries, that went on to win the televote by a comfortable margin. Cyprus was surging at exactly the right moment, but Israel had spent months building support and arrived at the final with too much momentum to be caught. The gap ended up close to 100 points. Cyprus made this season into a two-horse race, but Israel had already established itself as the entry everyone was trying to beat long before the contest even started. 2017 was completely different from what Eurovision had become in the years before it. While much of the contest was still built around big staging, flashy effects, and Eurovision spectacle, Portugal showed up with something incredibly simple. No dancers, no gimmicks, no fireworks, just Salvador Sobral standing there and letting the song do all the work. This result is so remarkable that it wasn't driven by a jury televote split or a dramatic voting battle. This is what a true consensus winner looks like. Salvador didn't have to rely on one side of the voting carrying him over the finish line, because both of the juries and the public were fully on board. In a contest where fans are usually arguing about whether the right song won, 2017 was one of those rare years where almost everyone seemed to agree. The performance felt completely out of place compared to the rest of the lineup, and that ended up being its biggest strength. Portugal was operating in a different context altogether. The intimacy and emotional vulnerability of the song made it stand out far more than any staging gimmick could have. The gap ended up being so big. Bulgaria brought a polished modern pop song and delivered it almost flawlessly. In most years, that performance would have had a very real chance of winning Eurovision. The problem was that 2017 wasn't most years. Bulgaria ran into a song that connected with both the juries and the public at a level that almost never happens. Unlike many Eurovision winners, Salvador didn't win because one side preferred him more than the other. He won because everyone preferred him. And when that happens, the scoreboard usually ends up looking exactly like it did in 2017. "2022 was not like anything Eurovision had ever seen before. The contest was completely overshadowed by the invasion of Ukraine, creating a level of emotional solidarity that had never really existed on this scale. At the same time, Ukraine was sending an infectious folk rap track that was already one of the most distinctive songs in the lineup. What makes this result so fascinating is that for most of the voting sequence, it looked like the United Kingdom had played a perfect game. Sam Ryder won the jury vote, delivered one of the UK's strongest Eurovision performances in decades, and looked like the clear favorite heading into the televote. Under normal circumstances, that would have been enough to win. Then, the televote happened. Ukraine pulled 439 out of a possible 468 televote points, a number that barely seemed real when it appeared on the screen. It is a very strong public vote. Country after country kept giving Ukraine maximum points until the result was effectively over before the full televote reveal had even finished. The final gap ended up looking absurd. Up until that moment, contests had actually been relatively competitive. Then Ukraine's televote arrived and instantly turned a normal Eurovision result into one of the biggest winning margins in modern history. The debate around how much of that support came from the song and how much came from the wider geopolitical situation will probably never end. What isn't really debatable is the scale of what happened. Ukraine completely broke the televote, and once those points appeared on the screen, nobody else in the contest had any chance of catching them.
je vais, la reine des problèmes.
This year, after several years of Eurovision being defined by jury televote battles, political discussions, and razor-thin finishes, Dara arrived with a song that simply made people want to move. It was contemporary, expensive, and designed for a modern Eurovision stage, while still weaving in cultural influences that gave it a distinct identity beyond just being another dance track. What makes this result so remarkable is how unexpected it was. Dara was certainly considered a contender, but very few people expected this level of dominance. Most bookmarkers had the contest looking more competitive, and even among fans, the expectation was that the juries and televoters would split their support between several different entries. Instead, Dara ended up doing something that rarely happens in modern Eurovision, winning both sides of the vote. The televote success wasn't that surprising, given how energetic the performance was. The biggest shock was the jury result. Juries usually spread their points around or gravitate toward more traditional jury-friendly entries, yet Dara managed to unify them behind a modern club track, thanks to its polished production, strong performance, and the way it blended mainstream appeal with cultural elements. That's why the gap was very wide. Dara completely drained points away from her rivals. Every point Dara gained was a point someone else wasn't getting. By the end of the night, there was no real debate left on the scoreboard. Another interesting part of the 2026 result was Israel's performance. Compared to the previous 2 years, the narrative of sympathy voting appeared to be losing momentum, at least in the televote. The huge discussion that had spilled far outside the Eurovision bubble in 2024 and especially 2025 felt noticeably less intense. At the same time, the juries seemed increasingly comfortable rewarding Israel points. In the end, though, none of it was enough to challenge Dara. Hopefully, 2026 won't be remembered for a political storyline. It should be remembered because one entry unexpectedly united both the juries and the public. What looked like a straightforward club anthem on the surface ended up connecting across almost every demographic Eurovision has. And that's how you end up with one of the most dominant victories of the modern era. Like and subscribe for more Eurovision stats, rankings, and deep dives. See you in the next breakdown.